Play, Watch, Listen is a game development and games industry podcast featuring 3 game developers: Austin Wintory, who is a video game composer, Mike Bithell, who is a video game director, and Alana Pierce, who is a video game writer. This show is supported entirely by Patreon, and Patreon supporters actually got an extra 25 minutes of this particular episode. But whether you're a Patreon supporter or you're listening on YouTube or on any of our audio podcast feeds, we hope you enjoy the show.
How am I in terms of fires?
Yes, I said, Austin, how are you in terms of the LA fires, which is why we took a break for a couple of weeks because the city is on fire.
I had a pretty front row view of the whole thing, especially when it started. It was very surreal because the Altadena one, the Eaton fire, kind of was rising up directly in front of my studio and arced across the entire sky. So it was weird because that morning of Wednesday the 3rd or whenever it was when it first began, I went up on the roof of my studio because half the sky was this like picturesque blue sunrise, pearl, like ocean blue. And then the other half was just black.
Yeah. And it's like a line.
It was.
Oh, really? You can like see.
Yeah. You can see the blue underneath the black. Very crazy.
Well, and it went straight up. It was very surreal. And so, yeah, I was never in any danger. Even the air quality problems didn't hit my area as bad as others because we were just kind of right on the fringe. We did have a lot of shit, and I definitely had ash all over my car here at the studio, but it wasn't anywhere near as bad. I'll send you a link if you don't mind also putting it in the description. They made a Google spreadsheet of all the different like GoFundMes of all the various musicians. Just again, it's obviously catered very much to my community.
No, totally
So, you know, mileage may vary. I don't begrudge anybody not feeling invested in that. I think I basically just indiscriminately was just like, I don't know this person, but whatever, because it was just the more I thought about the level of reboot. I have one friend, it's a husband-wife pair who lost their home. And the wife, has the most wonderful gallows humor about the whole thing. They're lucky. They, like me, they don't work from home and their studio was not lost. So they can like continue to go to work and also people that they work with, they got well taken care of. They haven't asked really for money because they're like, our situation is so much more forgiving, even though they lost their house. The very fact of not losing all their equipment is so huge because the number of musicians that I know that lost irreplaceable instruments, for example, the most heartbreaking story by far, my friend Star Parodi, who is a composer, amazing composer, orchestrator, but she's also a pianist of great renown. She played on the Arsenio Hall show for ages. And I can't remember the story of how she came to own it, but she owned a 1920s Steinway grand piano that had belonged to MGM and was just like permanently housed on the MGM scoring stage, and was featured in recording sessions to tons of classic films, including The Wizard of Oz. And
oh wow,
so like her piano was considered essentially a kind of piece of Hollywood history. And it's gone. Yeah. And she's been staying with a composer mutual friend. So it's like those kinds of things where the musician, there's a guy, Paul, this Indian musician. He's not Indian. He studied Indian music his whole life, deeply immersed in that culture. One of the leading experts among several, collaborating with and studying with people like Ravi Shankar, who were, seminal figures in these traditions, and, grabbed what he could, but lost tons of instruments. Some of these are instruments where, people that do that kind of work, they'll travel to India, buy things from a local person who makes these instruments, bring them back. Yeah. There's no store you can go to buy them again, and that
irreplaceable.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that's been just absolutely brutal. But in any case,
video games. How do you feel about them? 2025. How are they going?
Well, I mean, did you have a chance to see that massive.
The 200-page document.
Way too long.
you
I
sent
just
us.
realized
Yeah,
that the podcast has been off center this whole time. That's a real shame. That's
Has been off.
Shout out to
center?
everyone who's already commented before they got to this point in the video on that.
I'll see.
Do you
if
mean
Jack
like
can fix
your like OBS?
yeah, I had it like way off. Real bummer.
So professional.
No, you sent us a 200-page presentation like yesterday and said it'd be good if you could
Read
read
this.
the whole thing. Austin, go fuck yourself.
Yeah.
No, I did not read 200 pages of a presentation you sent me yesterday.
It did take
I'd like
a
to
couple
echo
hours
what
to read.
Alana said, but with like a layer of British niceness.
Yes.
That was
Go
really
fuck
interesting.
Go
thyself.
erstwhile and consider the opportunity available to you by engaging in coitus with yourself. Yeah.
But you can tell us what it is and,
Auto coitus.
and why we should read it.
I thought it was a fascinating, dispassionate analysis of the state of the industry,
Yeah, sorry.
principally
Yeah, can you give people
economically.
context of what this is?
I'll open up right now.
It's
Yeah, let's pull it up.
yeah, I should do that as well. Yeah,
Matchball.co.
and it was just I thought it was interesting. I thought, some of the like high he was trying to suss out is, we saw this big surge in users, in engagement and hours played and that sort of thing, and obviously in revenues in the immediate wake of the pandemic. And then there's been a kind of correction. Like, I think there's increasingly an understanding that was a bubble, essentially, not unlike the tech bubble in 2000, like the .com bubble, where a huge surge did not necessarily create a new baseline norm, and that a lot of the layoffs and things are that have happened. Not all of them, obviously, but the revenue just was not sustainable at those levels, which meant that the overheads were not sustainable at those levels. Obviously, I'm giving a really quick and dirty summary, and this is only a small portion. It's just one of those, a small portion of his presentation. I found that overall it was an interesting look at the business and where things are going.
Just skimming through this is much better.
I'm also
than
skimming through it and I'm
my
like,
initial
damn.
dismissal was, this is really well thought
Yeah.
through. I like this. Yeah.
I'll leave a link to this as well.
Yeah, I think that I showed it to some friends who are, in all likelihood, smarter than I am, and or have been in the business longer than I have, who felt like he overall brings up some very good points, but that it's not a flaw. It's not like unimpeachably perfect analysis.
Sure.
There's no such thing, right? There's
True.
no such thing. Everything's so complex, it's impossible to ever get a perfect unifying theory of any economical problem. But
Yeah.
This is really interesting. Yeah, I'll dig into
One
it.
one of the pointed criticisms of it is on one of the slides, for example, it was saying how the broad game industry revenue has sort of struggled to keep up with the inflation, general economic inflation, in tandem with things like the inflation of costs, especially on huge AAA games.
Yeah, do you see the GTA 6 headline that everyone is sharing, which I've been so surprised to even see as news, because it's basically multiple members of the games industry are hoping that Grand Theft Auto 6 will cost $100 so everyone else can increase their prices. And I'm surprised that it's a news headline, because of course people want to be able to charge more for games, and they hope that game would excuse it. Like that makes total sense. But I always
He
go
brings
back
that
and
up in
forth
this
on-
presentation.
Oh, GTA
That
6 specifically?
GTA is like its own category, its own heading of the presentation, because of its potential impact on the industry's if GTA can successfully frame players' expectations that games can reasonably be this huge and cost this much, that other games can it creates like covering fire for other games, because other
absolutely,
games
'cause they're the only ones who
charging
can get
lower
away with it, and everyone will still buy it. Like Rockstar are
Exactly.
the only
It
ones
moves
who
the
do that.
Overton window, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, it moves the expectation.
And it's also
I
like
mean,
you
games
have
have cost $100 for a long time. It's just via DLC and
True.
additional
That's
content.
a good
and
point.
blah, blah,
Yeah,
blah.
it's also you have to remember that Rockstar's not just Rockstar, right? It's Take-Two. Like they've got 2K. Like it's like it helps that whole publisher if they can do that for one game, then they can do it for all of their games. Like it's very, very, very appealing. And I guess it'll be interesting to see if there's pushback. Like I feel like it's almost definitely going to happen that they'll do that. Because they kind of can. Like they are. The
Well,
only
and
ones who
also, I
can.
mean, but also the sort of back channel rumors about the cost of that game are so
Yeah, but they're also funded by infinite money printing GTA Online.
yeah,
They're
it's
so
true. Except that
uniquely funded.
they are. It's true. I mean, they are funded by essentially
Infinite
their
money,
prior
shot
games.
cards.
But that infinite money is essentially like GTA 5.
Yeah.
But there is no actual infinite money. I mean, it's one of those that if it cost $1 billion to make and it makes, 1.5 billion in revenue that's not
Yeah, when I say infinite, I just mean
hit.
there's no limit to shot cards, right? Like they don't have to actually make more. I mean, they do still make more content all the time, to be fair, but they don't actually have to make more in order to continue to have income, like to make revenue from GTA Online. Like, yes, that'll be the most expensive game ever made. I get so excited for a new Rockstar game every time because it's like, what are they going to do with all that money that nobody else can justify? The only reason they can justify the cost is because of GTA Online. But it's also the only ones in the industry who have that position. Like I
true.
kind of hope that they also don't create a new bar. Like I was thinking about this yesterday and I was like, I wish that the industry would, instead of doing that, scope back less. Like, can we just make the games back to the little, prefer the 15 hours than the 50? Just, can we just decrease scope, please?
Well, and that's where I think GTA is an interesting complicated part of the equation because they also make these games that yield hundreds and hundreds of hours of gameplay. So, like, part of the justification for the price is the overwhelming majority, I would imagine, of the justification. If someone says it's going to be 100, but this game will amuse you the next 10 years,
Totally.
the way GTA 5 has. It's like they are in a way feeding that problem, if you want to call it a problem, that like games be like the hunger for smaller, more concise games in a way is undone by the joy that GTA 6 is met with.
I just don't think GTA is even in the same industry. It's like Fortnite. It's a social platform more than a game.
I don't
I
disagree.
mean, there will be a cool single player campaign, but it's this. I really like this, by the way, Austin. I'm going to read through it properly at some point. But they refer to it as black hole games. This idea that the
you were on the
developers
same
definitely
page as
talk
me,
about.
26?
I was, but I breezed past it. But like the idea of like Fortnite is a great game, but has had this impact that we see those games like Fortnite that are just endless, lifestyle games. They finally managed it. The few that are doing well are doing so well that they are definitely drawing people away from other games.
Well, it's it's an
The
Ouroboros.
average player feels like they feel like the players are playing less games than they were 5 years ago.
Yeah, and
the other thing go on.
It's the industry eating its own tail, because I remember interviewing a bunch of indie devs. I think I interviewed Rami about it for a piece back, I don't know, 10 years ago. That was basically about how so many studios were like trying to slowly shift towards live service. Obviously, we saw that happen even more aggressively over the last few years because it is so sustainable if it succeeds. The problem is so few of them succeed. Obviously, Sony's just shut down a bunch of projects, allegedly, that were live service games, probably off the tail of Concord failing. But they make the black hole games because they want to be able to monetize player hours as much as possible. So the idea is like, if we can have people in one game and spend more money on it, that is the ideal. But then as a result, they have a harder time selling other games. So it's like, you've created the black hole and you're now just trying to create more black holes around it, but it doesn't. You can only have so many.
Yeah, and I think hanging over all of this is another thing that I'm really glad to see in this that you don't see much in the conversation is we are ultimately living through the decline of the cultural dominance of the English-speaking world. Like fundamentally across all spheres, the middle class is growing internationally. and English-speaking movies, games, everything are seeing to some extent decline. That doesn't explain the whole thing by all means. I think the big treatise of what Austin shared here is there is actually 20 different things simultaneously happening, of course. But like, it is really telling when you look at the point that they make here that there are Chinese-produced games that are making more money in China than American games are making worldwide. Yeah, and Korean, and because ultimately there are these enormous populations who've achieved middle class, who have games consoles and PCs, who are playing locally made stuff because it speaks to them more, because it's culturally appropriate for them.
I mean, Tencent, right? Like most of our industry is kind of owned by China at this point. And
also
speaking from a fallen empire,
I wouldn't
really noticeable that America is kind of on its
not the main character anymore.
Culturally,
exactly. You also can't gloss past the fact that there's extreme restrictions on what can even get into the Chinese market.
True.
It's
true.
It's not to say that people wouldn't
Games for Peace composer Austin Wintory.
Yes, exactly. I mean, I'm not refuting what you said, but I do think it's not purely a cultural phenomenon. I think there are geopolitical forces that are actively manipulating these outcomes for I say that neutrally, like that. I think that's just a fact, regardless of what it entails.
I agree. Yeah, completely.
And, but yes, there's no question. Although interesting, I feel like the presentation also seems to indicate that some of those areas, like the mobile market in China, for example, which were for years seemingly like, just perpetual motion machines of growth, also show signs of sort of leveling off and stabilizing, and because there's just basically, it's like once everybody owned a smartphone, you kind of just hit a saturation point. It's like literally the biggest driver of growth at that point becomes population growth, where you just literally would need more people, and that's a fascinating. That's a fascinating thought as well, because it would mean that definitely the growth rates of the last few years are way beyond what the forthcoming years will, out of necessity, be.
Yeah, I also there's a page here, and this is the thing that I think about all the time. Is like, I don't feel like video games are necessarily competing with video games anymore. They're also competing with social media. Like, one of these pages mentions that one of the issues the industry is facing is rise of social video. Your phone is so accessible, and our phones are now leisure tools. So that it's a lot of time that a lot of people would have spent where they used to play a video game, that they are now browsing social media. We have less time. Totally a thing.
It's definitely the case for me. Like, watching YouTube and browsing social media definitely are falling in those periods of my day where I would normally pick up a game for half an hour. 100%.
Yeah, and they're not competing on the same level anymore, and that you are now also having to compete with somebody's TikTok algorithm just to have the time for them to be able to play more games. Like, that is, I feel like, an issue that I think the industry is pretty well understating. Like, I don't feel like they've really appreciated that just yet. I guess I'm also curious to see, the people have been talking about it. It's not a thing that I pretend to be an expert on, but the Trump administration with the tariffs. Like, people keep talking about a Trump's tariffs going to influence video games. Like, we're obviously talking very US based here. I don't know anywhere near enough about that to have any comment on it that's in any way informed. But the idea is that because Trump is trying to charge people for exporting into America, which has previously never happened, that the costs of those charges will end up being on importing, but the cost of those charges will end up being on the user at the end of the day, or the consumer at the end of the day, which seems extremely likely.
That's always how those work, which is why I don't understand.
Silly to pretend it's not.
Yeah, it's an absolutely baffling line of reasoning to call tariffs a tax on foreign countries.
The companies certainly aren't going to eat that cost.
No,
any good bot, at the end of the day, the buck always stops at the consumer's willingness to pay the price, which means if they do, they're now eating that cost. It's just, that's one of the most 101 level econ.
It is a weird one, and it feels like everybody knows that. Like, we're all like, what?
The most Steelman version I've heard from Trump defenders on that is that it's less about that actually going through, and it's more about trying to leverage better trade deals as with that as the threat.
Interesting. I could see that. Being a thing.
And I'm like, okay, that's a more open-ended question about what the outcome could be, because anything that sort of stymies trade, I generally am opposed to. But unfavorable trade deals, the complaint that's made about China. I've never investigated this to know how true or pervasive this is. I have had a little taste of it through my world that would suggest there is truth to this complaint, which is that China doesn't really respect IP anywhere, like the way the sort of the West ecosystem of Europe and Asia, Europe and the US and Australia and whatnot, like if I create a thing, my IP is essentially respected over international boundaries, here and in Europe, way more so. And I've seen it because I've seen my music show up in shit in unlicensed ways coming out of China, that there's nothing I can do about. It's just it is straight up theft. But it's like it also didn't. It's hard to tell what it cost me. Also, it's more of a curiosity from my angle, because I'm like, I don't think someone sold it to them per se on my behalf, and I lost out on the transit. I think they just used it illegally, and if they had somehow been prevented from doing so, they would have just used something else. So it's not like I lost something in an abstract sense. But anyway, so that's my little taste of the kind of IP law complaint, and that's where the trade negotiation leverage conversation to me is interesting. I don't again pretend to know anything, but the idea that if it's a leverage that forces better deals to be made, like respect for IP law, then I go, as an amateur observer from the sideline, that's intriguing.
Yeah, there's a win there.
Potentially, but otherwise tariffs. Yeah, how that could affect game. You're saying that like if I want to play a Nintendo game, or Black Myth Wukong,
it will cost
or
more.
some other, the price would go up by virtue of a tariff, absent all other considerations.
And no small part of that, again, it's not something like I don't pretend to know about tariffs. My base level understanding, again, is the same as you, is that the end cost will be on the consumer. I don't even think that's a tariffs thing. That's just a reality thing, but still, I feel like the caveat is important. Not sure if people are super aware that a lot of, this sounds like I don't know the right phrase. A lot of video game hardware manufacturing, but I'm specifically referring to discs, is done in Mexico. Like not a small amount of
nothing related to the physical experience of playing a video game is produced in the United States.
Right, a lot of it comes from Mexico, and
consoles, discs.
Yeah, so obviously
it's vast majority of it. That the argument would be that the tariffs would incentivize companies to bring it internally. I assume
that is.
We'll see if that happens.
Yeah, that is definitely Trump's argument, which, like in theory, great. Like we'd love to have more of it to be internal. In reality,
it seems unlikely.
Probably not going to happen,
especially given the cost of living differential and stuff with those places where it's being made. I imagine the tariff will be a lower cost to the company than paying American workers to make the same product. I would guess.
Almost definitely.
Ignorant, but I would assume that's
But my elaboration there was I like every administration. I always like try and do like a little read on how the president feels about video games in general. Trump, as Biden was before him, are both anti-video game violence. Like they both have attributed video games to causing violence. Or like
Trump will shift on that the second, because you've got to remember Trump is currently propped up by young men.
Yeah, no, totally.
Young white men, to be clear. So I wouldn't be shocked if his perspective did shift on that a little bit.
Not shocked if his perspective shifts on. He tried to ban TikTok and just brought it back 2 days ago. You know what I mean? Like he was the one who started
TikTok,
it. So, but still worth noting.
Also, video games have been a very easy political punching bag from because they're like an easy target for anybody that wants a convenient thing to blame problems on. You know what I mean?
We're also a smaller voting bloc before. Now gamers have aged up, so they're now demographically much more significant.
It's an interesting thought.
True, but I think it's also just
15 years
like really that one's just boomers think that video games cause mass shootings. Like that is just the age. I don't think that's a political party. I really think that is just people of that generation think that video games cause real world violence.
That's what I mean. Like you've seen it. Yeah. Both sides of the aisle have had their moments of art, of kind of video game pearl clutching.
Yeah, not pinning that on him specifically, just a thing that is also there. Like I said, also Biden has disparaged video games before. I'm trying to think if there's one other thing that was Trump relevant to video games that I'm now not remembering. Great job, Alana. Hey, we've done an excellent job of sourcing today.
We are professional, experienced communicators. We have
awards. I still have
read
them in
an
here.
article and talked about it, but it's good.
Something that I found interesting. It's possible I read this too quickly and I didn't.
We're doing it again.
Over it, but the when talking about the economics of game revenue and the challenge, the kind of the slide deck doesn't, the presentation doesn't seem to attempt to grapple with the impact of Game Pass. And I feel like you can't make this was something a friend of mine pointed out. And I realized, I don't remember seeing the kind of trying to weigh in the impact of that. And I think it's impossible to have a sort of holistic analysis of the economics of the industry and not try to grapple with that, because the consumer expectation that creates and the fact that so many developers release games and they're sort of told, hey, you were a hit. And they're kind of like, good, I guess. I don't really know. It's sort of, to me, I look at it's similarly where I go, you have movies that supposedly have been watched by 100 million people on Netflix, but all the tangible ways we used to be able to measure that, like filled up movie theaters or box office returns on Sunday night and all the things, there's an interesting difference that causes in terms of kind of the zeitgeist, where there are these movies like Red Notice supposedly is one of the most viewed movies ever. And
I kind of dug Red Notice and I felt bad immediately after watching it for feeling I had a good time with that. It was a dumb Men in Black.
I haven't watched it.
I also watched it.
You would think
it was fun, right? It was fine. It was fine. Yeah.
The sheer number of people that watched it, and yet it's not like in the air, in the zeitgeist.
Yeah, you can't equate that to me choosing to spend $10 to go see it.
Like when Barbie came out, it was omnipresent in the water, in the food supply. Like it was everywhere.
The water ran pink. You're absolutely right.
Things
like
can come out now and not be spoken about while being hyper consumed.
That I feel like that is an interesting new byproduct that sort of relates to what you were talking about earlier about, we have all these other things on our phone beyond games and even our consoles, you can watch like Apple Plus through your PlayStation and everything is all these parallel lanes of conduits that things can be massively consumed and not really make an impact, like consumed on a level that was previously unheard of. It's not even just why.
Right. It's a gap in the thing, but this is very product focused, and the economy of entertainment now is platform focused rather than product focused. I think that's the fundamental shift that's occurred. It does Game Pass and Netflix and what have you. They are not about individual products. They are about a service. They're about a subscription model, and they're essentially subcontracting content production to developers and publishers. Right? That's ultimately a product released on Game Pass is not in its own right a economically modelable product anymore. It's a work for hire content piece that is slotted into a subscription model.
And it makes
so
me
fundamentally
wonder...
that makes it disposable. I think that plays into the thing that the thing does go into around the GTA conversation of games have in real terms just been falling in value for the entire duration of their existence, because basically we've locked in at price points and then obviously inflation happens. So in real world money, it said it in the slide, the new GTA will be cheaper in real terms than the 2D GTA games of yesteryear in real terms, in terms of percentage of the average
is
salary, it's a
insane.
more expensive. It's a less expensive game.
That's crazy to think
But-
about.
And that is the subscription model is a further acceleration of that.
Well,
It's kind of, games don't matter. We tell the audience games don't matter, and then we're surprised that they don't care.
Well, and also the slide points out the marketplace is also orders of magnitude more full.
Right.
You know, there's a graph in here showing that, you know, the number of games released per month on Steam
It's
now is quite a bit more than annually 10 years ago.
It's
You know,
insane.
so it's a huge.
You could never play. I said this like a week ago and didn't fact check it again. Sorry, but I'm still confident that I could die before trying to finish every game that came out last year. If I tried to finish every game that
I
came out last
remember
year, I
when you
think I
could
would die.
complete Steam. There was a
You could
time.
speedrun
you
Steam.
Oh, yeah.
complete. You could play everything new that came
Yeah.
out that week on Steam.
No, it's not. It's not
Those
even
are the
tangible.
days.
But I think you're right, and it's
not
an
the case.
interesting point. This is really relevant to what Xbox has been doing recently. That they've faced some pushback for of the "Everything is an Xbox" campaign. I don't remember if we spoke about that.
Xbox, yeah.
That for them, games aren't the product anymore. The service is the product. Your subscription to Game Pass is the product that they are selling you. Not even really the hardware is their product anymore. They're a third-party publisher at this point. They're a mega publisher. They make hardware, but they also are a subscription service. So it's like, it's almost harder to be like, well, what do the video game sales look like this year, when that isn't necessarily the metric it used to be, considering how important just the subscription to a PS Plus or a Game Pass is now.
Xbox game sales are obviously plummeting.
They don't mean the same thing anymore.
because there's this other
Yeah.
and that is true. Like if you look at like indie game sales across different consoles, on the consoles where where it's in something like that, obviously less people are buying it, because if you're giving it for free to your most engaged audience, they're not buying it.
Yeah.
So indie games often, there was a brief moment where the visibility offset that. So the fact that you were gaining so much visibility from being in a service meant that you sold more copies.
But that's
because
not
word of
happening so
mouth
much
was
anymore?
better. It died off because there was just so many games.
I think that happened with the Switch.
That's the thing is.
Do you remember the Switch,
Yeah,
like
it's
Indie
like
Mania? Like there was a
Oh,
period,
100%. That
like
first
Shovel Knight.
6 months.
Yeah, and that's
100%.
died off too, right? From I think it has.
I mean, I'm sure there's people still doing well in specific cases, but yeah, this I think we've talked about this on the show. This is like one of my things is that there are this doc called it an engine, right? Like the idea, which is a silly word to use, that's already taken, but like something that like pushes a moment that pushes games. There's a very strong idea that Switch 2 will launch. And those games that come out in the first couple of months on Switch 2 will see a boost, because
That's what I figured.
everyone's buying console, everyone wants to play. That's why people want to be launch titles.
Yeah.
That's why we go and have conversations with Nintendo people and beg them to put us in their launch windows. Like that is 100% a thing that happens.
Yeah, I think Switch 2 is probably
likewise-
likely to be good for indies in the same way that the Switch was, but kind of no longer is, because
For a time.
same as anything else.
And then it will
it's too
fill
many
up.
now. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and it will, and then there'll be a new thing. I think that's what's been weird, and I think that document does touch on this, is games haven't had a successful one of those for a while. Not in a way that's kind of risen all ships. There's been obviously hits, there's been successes, there's been really impressive moments, but we haven't had a oh god, money hose kind of moment. And there was a good decade there where we had one of those every couple of a couple of those even every year.
Yeah.
Like where just like there was when Epic were launching the game store, and you could just walk up to Epic and be like, can I have millions of dollars for an exclusive on your Epic Game Store, please? And they just give it to you. And there's moments like that have happened, and basically the whole industry hasn't had the last couple of bubbles, the last couple of things that people were like, this is the thing that's going to drive money in the games industry, haven't panned out for anyone but one or two people. So you had the metaverse conversation, everything was going to be a metaverse.
Yeah.
Fortnite's done great.
Yeah.
There aren't other metaverses.
Yeah.
Ditto on NFTs. It's going to happen with AI as well. Like there's just we've had some bubbles, but none of them have actually materialized into real money.
Something that
for
the,
the
um,
whole
We got it
industry.
downriver from like the
Yeah,
Epic Store was the result of Fortnite's success, obviously.
Yeah.
So like there's these downriver things sometimes, but like yeah, we haven't had we haven't had those big influxes of money that we've had before.
He mentions AI tools in the presentation as something that the jury seems to still be out on. Obviously, there's a million different sort of piles of
Yeah.
shit to step into there. But in the most generalized sense, one potential hopeful avenue, hopeful in terms of the broader health of the industry, not so hopeful insofar as it might contract the size of the industry. But if because the sheer cost of making games is just so perpetually on the rise that if AI tools were to get that under control, it would potentially sort of stabilize the revenue of the industry.
In theory, yeah.
Yeah, he doesn't
I'm
make
skeptical.
bold. There's plenty of reasons to be skeptical, not least of which is like legislative blocks
Well, I
to
think there's
that.
one
And
rule. I think genuinely, like, there's lots of reasons, and there's the ethical stuff, which I'm not going to get on my boring high horse about. But like, there's only one that matters in the context of like an economic conversation, which is AI generated responses cost more than hiring a skilled artist, and that will be the case arguably indefinitely. We haven't seen the cost down. The kind of the classic kind of Moore's law stuff is not happening with AI. Everyone assumed it would.
Right.
And everyone kind of speculatively kind of jumped on. But fundamentally, the way these, I can't remember what the number is currently, but it keeps going up. Like OpenAI, companies like it, are burning, I mean, literally in terms of fossil fuels, millions of dollars a day giving the cheap results they're giving. Because they're having to just cover the cost of it, because fundamentally there's so much investment they have to, otherwise it crashes.
This is also
and I
the
think
thing
that's
that-
the fundamental problem, is the cost, and that's the only thing that matters on like an economic level. It is still cheaper to pay a skilled creative to do this work by a multitude than it is to get an AI to do it, and you get a better result with a human, and you get
It's
ownership
cheaper,
of the work and all of the legal stuff and blah blah blah.
it's cheaper from like an omniscient perspective because the AI companies are currently eating that cost on behalf of their customers.
Sure.
Which is the classic play.
Yeah,
You move
Uber.
the Ubers into
Yeah,
an
yeah,
area, you undercut the local competition, you wipe them out. That's what AI, honestly, I wouldn't want to assume that the people running these companies are evil, but they possibly are. If you can get the creatives out of an industry and replace it with AI, and then you can raise the price on the AI, and the companies end up paying more than they did for the creatives. We've seen that play out a billion industries.
It's a thing I think people keep forgetting when we talk about, again, I'm not going to get on any high horse about it, but the like, oh, well, this game would be, I would add infinite dialogue options if there's AI generated dialogue. That requires the game to be online. This is not something that we can ship built in. That requires access to a server that is promoting that. I just feel like that is completely forgotten from this conversation all the time. That, like, yes, games can ship with just AI without being online, but that particular function requires a constant server connection that is generating for potentially...
Technically, it might not going forward. That's the bet people are making on Nvidia, that graphics
I was
cards
going
will
to mention
basically be able to do
Nvidia
that stuff locally.
specifically because the article that I read about this, which terrible at sourcing today, about this was about Nvidia right now. And how that doesn't work right now. But again, it might. But like right now, you have to generate potentially hundreds, millions of pieces of dialogue per minute. Like if you have a successful game, that is a huge undertaking. That is a ton of energy that, like, I just feel like people aren't thinking about it from that perspective anywhere near as much as they should.
Humans got to this position of owning a planet by being incredibly efficient on a bioengineered level. Like we can cook our food and get more nutrients from it. We can work together. We can store information from generation to generation so that we can optimize over time. We are very, very efficient, and that efficiency is not matched by the awful kind of approaches of LLMs in particular. I'm talking about, like, AI has existed in games pipelines for decades, and it's very useful.
Yes.
But like the LLM thing in particular, like, it's just really inefficient. That's why it's expensive. It's not clever. It is, I mean, ironically, it's literally a million monkeys, a million typewriters. That's how this process works. It's incredibly inefficient.
Yeah.
We just worked out a way to pretend that monkeys were cheaper than they are for long enough that people believed it was real. And that's, at some point, that bubble will burst.
Yeah.
Or a technical breakthrough will happen, which is obviously also possible.
Yeah.
We're certainly trying very hard for it, so yeah.
That's the thing.
100%.
I can't say that I find it very convincing, the argument that the AI companies would make the tool, for all intents and purposes, free in terms of its real costs. that their investor money is currently sort of taking on. And that's assuming that I even understand how those investments are set up. I should caveat that I've never looked into that. It's just my intuition on how it's working from an outsider's perspective. But that said, if it were to be the case that it would be a kind of like a hoodwink, like you're describing, where, okay, now the industry is reliant on it, and now we're going to sort of charge you what it's actually worth, and you'll discover it's more expensive than hiring people. I don't see why that wouldn't just instantly kill the AI industry, because everyone's going to pursue whatever's the lowest cost option.
London.
What?
When I open a cab business, let's open a cab business. Like try and go into one of those markets once it's been saturated. Try and be a restaurant owner who wants to do your own deliveries. Try and go to a casino at 3 a.m. Like it's like there's a.
But isn't the answer to all of those?
This is the model. This is the model that's worked in those places, right?
But, well, I don't know how much you can apples to oranges those. I mean, for example, I don't know how it is in London, but like taxis, for example, in the US are inextricably linked to local politics. So you're not even really getting a clean sort of market tested, because the laws are a complicated mess, to say the least.
Yeah, I think I just don't believe in the market doesn't self-right. Basically, for these moments, it will once a monopoly is achieved, it doesn't matter if your service is less efficient than your competitors.
Monopolies are very unstable unless they're backed by something outside, like a government basically enforcing it. Like, look at utility companies. Everybody hates their fucking power and electric and natural gas provider and stuff, because these tend to be companies that are granted local monopolies. And so it's like...
And that's why I don't think AI is going to take over the world. That's why I think it's a bubble. Because I think at some point, as you say... Sorry, when I say self-right, I think it will just collapse. Because ultimately it won't be able to support... Because games can't be made for more money than they are currently. Like, that's why we're in this position. So once what I'm saying becomes real, assuming it does, which is a lot of assumptions, I think it will fall over itself.
It would have to, if they
there
can't.
There is a sweet spot. You can coast on a company that is convenient to interact with, but a worse deal, and that's why restaurants don't have their own delivery guys anymore. It would be better for that restaurant to not be on DoorDash or whatever it is in America. Like, it makes more sense for them to engage with DoorDash because DoorDash is on your phone, is the one that you're going to. So it's a classic thing, right? That's where the audience is, so that's where they're going to go. But I don't know if you could make a full argument that the differential in the audience you can reach via DoorDash justifies the cut that DoorDash is taking. Tech companies...
Well, most of those restaurants, though,
over time,
they react to that by raising their prices on delivery.
Sure.
And then like everything else, it lands to the consumer to decide if they want to pay the inflated price for the convenience. Because at that point, DoorDash is better. Like, as a consumer, generally speaking, I don't care for who the driver works that drops it off.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like, if they work for the restaurant or if they work for an independent, it doesn't matter to me. And even things like...
But you care about your price going up. If your video game costs $200, you're not excited about AI anymore, are you? You're like, well,
100%. That's why I push back at the idea that the market, when you say the market doesn't correct, it absolutely will, unless like laws go in and prevent it.
The market corrects slowly and inefficiently was what I should have said. It will. It's not necessarily an immediate perfect. Okay.
Can I throw a ball in here? I think that, especially in the West, this is very generalized. People are earning a whole lot of money and will pay well beyond their means for leisure. So, like, people, like, where the market is concerned, people often won't look for alternatives to Uber because it's convenient, and we've become very, very lazy with a lot of things like that.
I don't. If I'm in a new city,
you won't even compare prices. You'll go, this is the one I have. Yeah, so I don't, like, we're buying things on Amazon because it's so efficient, or because we're used to it, or because it's the thing that we know to search for something, rather than going for a local bookstore that could be much cheaper. So it's also
it can come in like 8 hours.
Yeah, I mean, love that too, but like it's this I don't know what the parallel is to video games, I guess, but like if you're already a Game Pass subscriber or something, and that increases, you might still just stay on that because it's the thing you know, than going with, and that becomes a monopoly, which doesn't look like it's very likely or anything, but you would do that instead of like going to buy those games separately or buy different games. You'll still just play the shit that's in front of you or the franchise that you're used to, or you'll keep buying the Apple product because you're in the ecosystem. You know, like we're so leisure focused to the extent that people are spending more money on leisure than they ever have before, even when they statistically cannot afford it. They'll keep doing it anyway.
Which happens, which does tend to correlate with moments of economic downturn generally. More people went to see movies during the Great Depression than went to see movies a decade later.
There's dopamine, right?
People seek out entertainment when their life sucks.
Find stuff to be happy about.
You know, yeah.
I have no idea the statistics on that sort of stuff. But I do know that at the end of the day, if you're offering a product at a price point that someone is acceptable, that they find acceptable, then they'll go for it. And that's exactly why everybody is keen to see if $100 price point is considered acceptable.
I think it's a really interesting one because like I was always paying $100 for games in Australia, right? I think
like in US dollar terms?
No, Australian dollars, but it's still like that's still a lot of money. I think they were
it's like 50 cents,
70 or something like that. I think that consumers are so desperate for Grand Theft Auto 6 that they will pay it and then it will become normal and there will be very little pushback, even though on paper right now there's a ton of outrage about it. I do think people will be spoon-fed that option sort of mindlessly, and maybe I don't have enough faith in people or that system works, but there's so much hype. We are not immune to billion-dollar marketing campaigns. We are not immune to the appeal of that video game.
You can't live through horse armor and think that the audience is actually going to not go along with it, right?
I'd love that.
I remember the days of horse armor being like a massive consumer focus, and it drifts, it fades.
I think even 10 years ago, the way that gacha games operate would have been outrageous. But, you know, horse armor ruined everything.
Totally.
But it'll be interesting to see. Like, I really do think like GTA 6 is such a catalyst for this particular thing. It'll be really, really interesting. I am expecting audiences to roll over, breaks records, games are $100, and then the next thing that's way too expensive for us gets pushed, even if people can't realistically afford it. Like, we're so dopamine deprived at this point because of all the technology and all the leisure that we consume at all times. We're so afraid of any kind of pain, and people will spend outside of their means in order to have entertainment. That is my bet on this, but I'm very
God bless you, people of the world. We as free people who work in the entertainment industry are very grateful for you.
And thank you for your contribution.
To our
thank
lives.
you. Thank you for that.
It does show. I mean, we're kind of retreading what we were already talking about, but this presentation does also highlight that games have not had to share that space as much as they are now.
Yeah.
And that people might be, consuming entertainment at increasingly high amounts, but that games might be a decreasing share of that.
Because we're in a bigger pool now. Like it's sweet.
You could make a similar chart about radio in the 50s, right? Like as TV
video games are
up
competing with Twitter. Like it's a silly
that.
thing to say. They're not competing with just each other. They're also competing with Instagram. Like that's the landscape that we're in right now, that I feel like you'd have to zoom out and be like, every minute that you have is the thing that's the most appealing to a lot of these companies right now. Your time is the most valuable thing you have to these corporations, and you are splitting it between so many different things.
Better than we are at dopamine.
Totally.
They are better. The video scroll up, like I have to literally just not go into those things because I'll just get lost in it.
I get angry at myself once a week. I'm like, why am I looking at this? What the fuck am I doing? Like I know it's bad, and I still go, God damn it. You just can't.
Like games for all of our sins. We are not that focused on making addictive interactions. It's been taken to a new art by those platforms.
Well, or we're not as good at it.
Or we're not as good at it. Yeah, we might just be shit.
I mean, like League of Legends is great at it, but
100%, you're absolutely right. We're trying.
Well, and the mobile market is dominated by exactly. So anyway, I find it
maybe Trump
fascinating,
was right. Ban it all. Ban TikTok. Take it down.
That's a clip.
I think that the thing I always come back to is, if we want to be as maximally emotionally dispassionate in our analysis, not a lot of people lose sleep over the horse and buggy industry folks that lost their jobs 100
Right.
years ago.
Right.
And it could be that while games had multiple decades of looking like, you know, the next sort of gold rush, as it were, it could be that there just simply is a market correction that we're in the early stages of that will mean
Fully believe
there
so.
will be fewer jobs available
Yep.
in the industry.
And I think there's going to be a
and
boom in China and Korea at the same time. In terms of jobs.
it could very well be, and which could also very likely mean that they would then have their own subsequent corrections.
Totally,
like they're having a big rush. And point being that, you know, like for the longest time, I was quite certain that where cinema was the clear gold medal champion of culture for humanity in the 20th century.
It's not right now.
Like it was the number one way in which sort of, you know, cultural impact was disseminated. You know, books and poetry and stage theater and whatnot were not changing the world and changing people's and providing joy for people and all that on nearly the same level as film. Just reached a level of cultural, you know, impact that nothing had before. And
I
I
don't
was
think it is right now.
I think that's unquestionably true. And but I was certain that games would be the 21st century's
I also
chaser
think
to that.
It kind of is.
Well, it may be now, but there's already signs that maybe that moment has already peaked. Because there's so much, like the landscape, things jump into the landscape at a faster rate.
It's
than
short form
before.
fucking video now. Like that's.
I think you're right with the offset thing. I remember having a horrible lunch once with a guy he was a graphic designer, which is why we were talking, because I think we shared some friends I've not spoken. This was a decade ago. And his job was, he was a graphic designer in this, I may have even told this story in the show before, of cigarettes. He was a graphic designer in the cigarette industry.
Right.
And basically talking about the way that cycle works around the world of like, they are currently selling traditional 50s cigarettes into a massive swathe of the African continent. And then we are at the vaping stage, and everyone's trying to work out what the stage after vaping is. And they know, okay, well, we're going to have to put the filters into the African continent 10 years from now. Then we're gonna do nicotine patches, and then we'll get to vape. And it's just this cyclical thing of just basically companies go into a sector, build it up, get, you know, governmental kind of rules and regulations on them, adjust to that, and the cigarette industry is just running the 50-year playbook over and over again, just on time offsets around the world. And that just kind of blew my mind and disgusted me that this guy was very proud of his very well-paid job making cigarette adverts.
It's almost like it's
2013 or
smarter
whatever
for
it was.
you to plan for your own downfall. Like it's smarter for the cigarette industry to be like, okay, and then they are going to regulate this. What are we going to have when they do that? Just plan for
It's
it.
the same companies making vapes
I know.
as were making cigarettes.
Who are
Like,
funding
it's
the
same-
anti-cigarette ads, who are making the cigarettes in the first place. Like it's
Which is what's
it's
interesting
cyclical.
about the the legalized weed industry is that still seems to be independent. I've not looked into it enough. Maybe that's
It
not
certainly
true. Maybe
feels
behind the
independent
scenes
here.
Feels like it doesn't feel like Budweiser has emerged yet in the weed market, right? Like
Doesn't feel that way.
I'm surprised by that. I'm
It
surprised they're
feels
not jumping
indie
on that.
in a weird way.
It feels
Yeah.
indie. I bet it's actually 4 companies behind the scenes.
Almost
all of
definitely,
which
we've been
are
tricked,
Seth
but they have to
Rogen
feel
pretend to
yeah,
be
they
an
have to
indie,
feel
but yeah,
indies because
yeah.
it's weed. On that note, I have to head off. But yeah, I'll leave a link to where you can donate to wildfire relief. Austin, if you want to send your link as well, and then we'll leave that presentation below. I'll probably go through it on a Twitch stream, actually, just like to cover everything because it is really, really interesting. Sorry that
That was some
I
good
dumped
stuff.
on
Yeah,
you
thanks for bringing that,
being-
Austin. I apologize
23
for
pages.
being dismissive initially. Yeah. I'm
Oh,
sorry.
I assumed
feel
it would be
bad
great.
for-
It's just you can't just give homework the day before. What are you, Satan?
People have jobs.
Look, I
This is
thought
Play
you
Watch
guys
Listen,
were
everybody.
serious about this podcast, but now I know.
No, we're serious about the world's coolest jobs. You gotta start that up.
We're serious about that podcast. That's the podcast we want to watch.
Is this our first episode in 2025? I think it is, right? Because of the fires? Yeah, so
certainly mine.
happy
It will be.
2025, everybody. We will see you in a couple of weeks. Bye.